Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons, Donell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education, and Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Well, welcome to this very unique episode of Literacy Talks. I'm Stacy Hurst, I'm the host, and I'm joined in real life today by Donell Pons and Lindsay Kemeny, and we are coming live from the Reading League Conference. It's the 8th one, 2024. If you're not here in person, we hope you are following on social media because lots of great nuggets of knowledge are being dropped on there and lots of sightings. Lindsay, Donell, how's the conference been for you so far?
Great. I think we're loving it, aren't we, Lindsay? I'm getting a little lost. This venue is huge, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm the only one, but I've done a few tours of each floor.
Well, you know, because I've been with you. It's so great. It's so huge. It's really spacious. But yeah, we're getting lost. And Donell and I were laughing so hard this morning because we were trying to look at their map. And I'm like, okay, I am getting old because I cannot see the tiny little numbers.
Yeah.
And so we took our phone and like zoomed. Because I just kept thinking, I need a magnifying glass.
Yes.
And then I just took the phone, camera, zoom, and we figured out.
Well, it may be unimportant to note, but I was the last one here because, and Donell, I love you, your directions were exactly wrong. She said right from the registration, go downstairs. So I did, which is where lunch is, by the way. Everybody is like lining up for that.
Well, now you know.
Yeah, but it was uncrowded on the way up here because everybody's going to lunch. So it was great. So let's just have our quick conversation today and talk about what we've experienced so far and what we're looking forward to. How does that sound? Now, you guys were at the keynote, as was I. Zaretta Hammond did. Oh, she's so inspiring. What were some of the key takeaways for you guys?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Lindsay and I both talked about how she's good for sound bites. She has like these sentences that you can take back and use. And she was saying reading is the epicenter of equity. I thought that was an interesting one to kind of ponder on and think about. How about you, Lindsay?
Yeah, I liked, she was talking about liberating education requires marrying the science of reading with the science of learning. And I think that's really important that we do talk about those more together, more often than we do. And I love one of the terms I love that she used that I haven't heard is word wealth.
Yes.
Talking about that vocabulary and, that builds the learning power, that word wealth. So I like that.
Yeah, I thought there were some really, again, in the area of sound bites, but I like how she weaved joy into the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I love the intersection of cognition and language and learning. It was just really cool how she did that. I also, things I've heard before, but somehow when she said it in the context she did, about in any other profession, if you were only 30% successful, that would not be okay. Mm-hmm. And yet we've like normalized that. So I thought that was really interesting too.
And that practical way of looking at, are you reading with your students? Have you heard them read? Those things that maybe you get so deep in you don't remember to do, but remember that tells you a lot about your student. I thought that was good too.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I kind of was questioning, maybe I don't know if I agree with, is that she was talking about that we have a tendency, like teachers, to over scaffold.
Yes.
And I was just wondering what you guys think about that, because I actually feel like we have more of a tendency to under scaffold and just think our students can do it and send them off to do it independent. And we need more of that guided practice, more of that scaffolding. I don't know.
Do you know what? I can see why you're thinking that based on how she mentioned that today. I've heard her talk in another setting where she kind of elaborated on that. Mm-hmm. And she's worried that we're enabling students so that we don't remove the scaffold, is what I think that she was alluding to before as well. Because she said that we have to be careful, especially with, we have to check our biases first, of course. But then also just make sure we're not assuming that a student is going to need a scaffold always, and make a plan to remove it.
Well, it's like an art. right?
Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
art to know when they need the scaffold, really, and when to start releasing. So that makes sense.
I was thinking of all the various settings that she gets to witness too, and thinking about, yes, in other settings, different classrooms, not scaffolding too soon, as you say, to see what the student is capable of doing. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
We just had this conversation with my students actually, because they're in a position where they're assessing. And specifically, this is my first literacy class. So they're assessing phonemic awareness, which I think is relatively easy to assess. They usually do okay. But we were talking about that because the assessment we're using builds in scaffolds and manipulatives for the assessment. And I said, don't use them because you want to see what the student can do alone. You use those scaffolds or those manipulatives if they need more support. So we've already, that resonated with me when she said that this morning too. That's a good call out.
And I also like that she was talking about preparing our students for rigor, but also brought it back to us as educators. What do we need to do to prepare ourselves for rigor and to find joy in our own productive struggle? Because she was talking about help the students, find joy in the productive struggle. And I love turning that around on us. We probably, the three of us all find joy in that because that's our nature. But
and we've had some experience. We've been to some rodeos, I guess you can say. Yeah, I love that too. And I love that you mentioned that, Lindsay. Because I, as a teacher, I actually, and to some people who don't understand, it would seem maybe just not right. I like to see my students productively struggle because, as she said, then change is going to happen. Then it's going to, but thinking about my own struggle, I'm going to be more aware of that. Yeah.
And that productive struggle to get to the next level, because I'm always trying to improve my practice, knowing that when I improve my practice, my students get a better me and thus a better outcome, right?
Well, and in the classroom, there's definitely, there's a lot of struggle every year with different things that are thrown at us as teachers. And so I definitely can let it overwhelm me or frustrate me. And so I think it's a good call to say, yes, this is a struggle. Yes, we're learning we just adopted a new curriculum or whatever. It's a struggle, but make it a productive one and make it help you be even better.
Yeah. And you do a good job, Lindsay, in your presentations about your 7 mighty moves. You don't come out of the gate and say you should do all these 7 tomorrow. You're really good about
baby steps.
That timeline. Yeah. Baby steps. So.
And I appreciate too, Lindsay, you taking things away and being willing to try them. Like on a Monday, you'll try and we'll talk, right? You'll say, oh gosh, I gave this a try. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that is great. Then we've only had one session after the keynote for today. So what session did you guys attend?
Well, I thankfully we all 3 attended something different, so that'll be interesting to talk about. I was in a session that was very crowded. I hear they weren't all kind of equally crowded. Mine was pretty crowded. Folks were sitting on the ground. It was Melissa Orkin and Elizabeth Norton, and they did When Practice Isn't Enough, providing explicit, systematic fluency instruction in upper elementary, and it was actually really good. We got into some brain science with Elizabeth Norton, but then she also talked about the difference between, and is there any boost for a student who does a repeated read versus just reading? And there isn't.
That's interesting.
So in doing a comparison, there isn't. And so allowing students to also do a wide read, supported obviously with having been taught explicitly how to approach that read, but that is as productive as what we thought of as repeated reads, which is interesting.
Really?
Yeah, not to give up repeated reads because they do have their place.
Sure.
But that was an interesting finding.
Oh, yeah. Huh. I'll be interested to take a deeper look at that. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Lindsay, what did you attend?
I went to Molly Ness's presentation on comprehension. She said this is a new presentation she hasn't given before. It was called The More You Read, The More You Know, Best Practices for Comprehension Instruction. And she, kind of went through her journey on her thoughts about comprehension. And she started off by talking about the Durkin study, which you're familiar with it, observed, 4,000 minutes of teaching and found that comprehension instruction was observed less than 1% of the time. The majority of the time was spent on assessments. And isn't that what you do when you think about comprehension? You read the text and then you ask your students questions at the end. But she talked about something that I briefly mentioned in a recent episode we had where I talk a lot about how we have this tendency to overcorrect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the term she used was overboard. Yes, we want to build knowledge and, knowledge building curriculum. Great. We want to build knowledge, but don't go overboard with knowledge at the expense of strategies, because it's both and you still need strategy work. So she was like, yes, knowledge matters, but it's not enough. And she kind of, shared her thinking and how it's shifted and kind of evolved over the years, and talked about, leaning into some of those strategies that do have a lot of effects. Like she talked about like stopping to summarize what you've read, doing think louds. How often do we model our thinking aloud to students as we read, helping them kind of see, kind of peeling back the curtain, helping them see how you are making sense of the text. So
yeah, there's a lot of power in that. I love Molly Ness. Her book is great. And I think, too, those of us who are trained in balanced literacy, we had a rich approach to those read alouds and think alouds. But I really like how she aligns it more with what we know to fit into cognitive science as well, and language development. It's a little more intentional, I want to say, and more targeted. So, yeah, that's really cool. And I didn't know that was a new presentation, or I might have chosen that one. Although I loved the one I went to.
Yeah,
I
what
went
did
to
you go to?
Dr. Ryan Lee James, and they talked about dialect differences and variation is the word. But it was so powerful. One thing that I took a picture of, and I know this is just a side note, we have access to all the slides, which are great. The
Yeah, it's
app
nice.
is working well for me this year. How about you guys?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't. Okay, I was going to mention I love that they still gave us our paper program, because I love having the paper program, and haven't gone into the app as much.
Yes, I understand. We'll wrap up with those kind of things, I guess, about the conference. So they highlighted UNESCO's definition of literacy, right? And when we talk about literacy, I know we've said it includes writing, speaking. They have a list: speaking, thinking, creating, and reading and writing. So really expanding what we do in the classroom. And a big highlight was we're so focused on skills that we don't attend to the structure, which I know Zaretta Hammond has talked about before too, like the structure of the classroom, or the whole child in mind, and who they are when they come to us, and how all of those things matter. And then what is good, reiterated, something that we've heard often at the Reading League conferences, what is good for all kids and harmful for none, right? That you have to be inclusive about differences in dialect. So, and I think Dr. Hammond mentioned that this morning a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Speaking and listening. I think we've overlooked those for so long. And, we just had recorded an episode on oral language, and it's just, we can't take that for granted.
Yeah. And Dr. Ryan Lee James is a speech and language pathologist. So that's the lens that she looks at literacy through. And she gave us a whole list of things to look for students who might have some language processing issues. And they're very practical. Like if they can't follow multi-step directions, or they have a hard time understanding what you mean when you say, do you have a question? If they just make a statement, right? Just those kind of things. It was really good. And I had to duck out just a little bit early, so I had time to get lost based on Donell's directions. Before we came.
Sorry. I have been everywhere.
Oh, well, we were like,
all right. I got here. That's
now we
easy.
understand the map, but how does that relate to where I am right now?
That was my problem.
don't know.
I was looking at it going, well, they have designed and communicated each floor brilliantly, but how do you get to the floor? Like, where is that? Yeah. Yes.
One thing we didn't mention when we started out at the keynote this morning, they did have us have a moment of silence for the folks who've been impacted by the hurricane, and we are in the region.
That's true.
And so just being thoughtful of that, it has been a presence here at the conference. I remember up to the conference checking in to make sure we're still going to have the conference, and just being mindful that even though we're having a great time in this part of the state, there are still folks who are really suffering, and just to be mindful of that and help where you can.
Yeah, that's impactful.
Yeah.
Great. And speaking to segue to a lighter topic, the weather. The three of us are from Utah, and when we landed, and I got here on Tuesday, Monday. Thank you. Sometime this week. It was actually cooler here in North Carolina than it was in Utah.
Crazy.
I know, and it's mid-October. But today I feel like the weather here is delightful.
Yeah.
So pleasant. It's fall-like.
So was your session packed this morning?
Oh, no, it wasn't. How about yours?
Because both of ours, we had tons of people sitting on the floor, and I was just like, oh no, like, because this is such a huge venue, but I'm just worried that there's not enough breakout sessions. I don't know. We'll see. But maybe it was just our two, the ones we chose, and the others were fine.
It did make it easier to decide where to go. That There's fewer choices.
There's a chair.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. When you're looking through them, it is sometimes.
Yeah. Like, I
when
want to
you're
go to all of them.
indecisive.
Yeah. Speaking of which, what are you guys looking forward to maybe next or even today and tomorrow? I'm going to have to pull up my
There's
agenda.
some really good choices on the docket. Carolyn Strom is doing Understanding the Early Reading Brain, Building Capacity, Not Compliance. Sounds like a really
Have you
interesting.
seen that one before?
I haven't.
I recommend it.
Okay.
She's great at describing all of those neuroconnectivities.
Yeah.
She uses something like, is it called Brain City or something?
I think so.
Yeah. It's a good, it's a great one. You'll really enjoy that.
I'm excited for Kay Wijikumar, even though I have taken her knowledge acquisition and transformation course. I'm still going to go to her session as a little refresher, and I'm excited to see her live.
Nice.
I love how her name just rolled off your tongue.
Oh yeah,
You've practiced.
Oh, that
I
was
haven't practiced,
impressive.
but I've heard it. And Elsa Cardenas-Hagen, I'm going to go
Always
to
good.
hers, and Dale Webster's on structured literacy.
I got to learn from both of them yesterday. So we had a STARS higher education summit, and we got to hear from the keynotes were Dr. Cardenas-Hagen and Wes Hoover, Dr. Hoover. And he talked about the simple view of reading. And I noticed that he has a session based on that. I do recommend it because it will help refine to your point about going to something you're already familiar with and you're just refining knowledge. I found it very valuable. It was so insightful. So,
And I'm speaking tomorrow, so fingers crossed. Everything goes well. My laptop doesn't die or anything.
Yeah.
Actually,
Last
they
time.
have computers for us. I
Yeah.
guess I don't have to worry about that.
So far, the session I was just in, they had a little issue with the sound for a minute, but it got fixed
really?
right away. So I think you'll be fine.
Oh, great.
And then you two will appreciate this. We've been doing a little series on dyslexia. The first one was my husband.
Yeah.
So I sat down in a session and someone said, "Where's your husband?"
Oh, yes. It would be nice to
because-
have him
yes.
here. He's so helpful. We
We
talked about
mentioned
that in the
that,
last,
yeah, and our-
Big Sky. We
yeah.
talked about that.
Yeah. And we've probably mentioned it multiple times because we do love when Curtis comes.
I know.
In fact, this morning would have been handy
I
because
know.
I thought Donell was in my choice B session and she wasn't. So I
You could have sent him there.
said,
Yeah.
Curtis, go to this one. Yeah.
Yep.
Darn it. We'll have to bring him to the next one. I'm looking forward to this afternoon. Dr. Jamie Peevler is talking about building your scientifically based ELA block. And I'm always interested in that.
She's great.
Yeah, she really
love her.
is very knowledgeable and practical in her approach to things. I also, that's something that I think never gets old because there's so many ways to organize an ELA block.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that.
And Alex Shelton this afternoon is doing Supporting Secondary Students' Literacy Outcomes Using Evidence-Based, Culturally, and Linguistically Responsive Instruction. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting a lot.
Good.
The bar has been set.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there is one that looks like it's focused on higher ed this afternoon as well, structured teacher education.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be interesting.
Well, fun. Well, we'll probably have to we'll do a little wrap up and share some
Yeah.
other thoughts at the end of the conference. And
Yeah. And I can end this episode by saying, I mean, we're only in day one, not even midway through the day, but I have loved seeing people that we know and catching up and seeing them in real life and
It's
giving them
wonderful,
hugs and high
yeah.
fives. And
It's a good feeling. It's like everyone, we're all united in purpose, right?
Yes.
And we love the Reading League. They're
Yeah.
such an amazing organization. And it's
Yes.
really fun to see, how they're growing and all the different state chapters that we have represented here. And we didn't mention also they've always been in Syracuse in the past, and this is the first time they've had the conference somewhere else. We're in North Carolina, and it's great because it's a huge venue and there's plenty of space.
Yeah.
When we went to breakfast today, I was a little bit, oh no, what's this going to look like? It was wonderful. Tons of room for everyone. Yeah. There weren't any long lines. So, yay.
And
kudos.
the glimpse I got at lunch, thank you again, Donell, it looked really good too. Totally.
Well, we're going to head down there now.
Yes, now we know where we're going.
Oh, yeah. I got you. Yeah, and we do have a meet and greet as well today. Don't forget that. I don't want to be meeting and greeting everyone by myself. Or maybe I do. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to mention is just those conversations that you have with people. I have met so many nice people. And you're right, Lindsay, we all have that in common. So it's an easy and ready conversation to talk about literacy. Last night, and you guys witnessed this, Tyson Smith, who is the CEO of Reading Horizons, and I haven't seen each other in person, I would say years, actually. And we happened to be staying in the same hotel. You two were just checking in, and you left to go to Dr. Stephanie Stoller's Reading Science Academy reception. And I literally talked to Tyson almost the whole time you were gone. When you texted that you were back, I had just gone up to my room. So in that conversation, of course, we were passionately talking about a lot of things, but a woman came up to us and said, I just want to tell you, thank you for your passion in this conversation. Like, I can tell you both care about literacy. And Tyson said, it's our life. That's what he was saying to her as she was walking away. So.
It is our life.
It is. I thought, well said. We pretty much, it's our life. This is our life, and we love it. So, to the Reading League people, and we'll do a wrap up, but man, impressive. This is just a great conference. In my lostedness, I'm creating new words now. Is that word wealth? Or just not? Anyway, I ran into his last name is Macaulay, I believe. He's the social media director for the Reading League. Such a delightful person. And everybody from the Reading League, you'd think they would be stressed and anxious because they're just so calm and helpful and smiling, and it's great. Well, it's good to have this conversation. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us all and interrupting our lunch and having this talk. But it's good to have, and we'll follow up with a recap after we've experienced the rest of the conference. Any parting words or thoughts?
Nope, we'll just continue on. Have a good time.
Okay, awesome. Then hopefully you will be joining us soon for the recap.
If you're wondering where to find proven, outcome-focused ways to put the science of reading into practice, you're in the right place. Reading Horizons Discovery Product Suite is a foundational literacy program for grades K through 3 that leverages a versatile instruction method, a personalized student platform, and accessible learning aids that include phoneme cards, student transfer books, and decodable books. The program streamlines literacy instruction and empowers teachers so all learners can achieve reading proficiency. Go to readinghorizons.com/discovery to learn more and download the complete program details today.
Okay, welcome to part 2 of the Reading League episode of Literacy Talks, the Reading League conference, I should say. My name is Stacy Hurst. I'm the host. I'm joined by Donell Pons and Lindsay Kemeny. As I was for the first episode, the difference is we were all together then, and now we are back home after the Reading League conference. So we came to you live from the Reading League on day 1 of the conference. Is that right, guys? At the lunch break. And like I said, now we're home. So we're hoping to talk about the rest of the conference, and we're going to let Donell lead this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. So just a reminder, we were in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was beautiful. People were so nice, and the venue was beautiful too. There were a lot of people there. At one point, I think they said something like 2,500. That conference has grown exponentially every year, and it was a very large venue. And they did their best to accommodate us. They did a great job of getting us fed as well, some delicious meals. The hospitality was great. It was a little crowded at times in some of the rooms. I think we commented on that the first day, and it didn't get any better those second day and so on. And so maybe that's a thought or two, is to think about those sessions where folks really want to get inside and hear what folks have to say. Problem becomes is that you take a seat on the floor and then folks don't really want you sitting on the floor. So just something to think about. We had a lot of really great, we talked a little bit about the introduction and who gave that the first day, the keynote in one of the first sessions. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the rest of Wednesday and then on to Thursday and some of the sessions that were given. And there were some great things that happened. So I'm going to toss it right back out and say Lindsay first, and then Stacy will give you a minute to think about it or two, because I know you've been rushing around today. But Lindsay, give us a little thought about some of the sessions the rest of that day, Wednesday, that stood out to you.
Okay. I don't remember which were which day, right?
Yeah.
But I did go, and maybe this was day one. I went to Jamie Peevler's session. I am a fan of hers. She just has such a wonderful presence, and she's so knowledgeable. And something I really liked that she said is she used this analogy about following your curriculum. She related it to like following an atlas. And she talked about how, following your curriculum is like following an atlas. You follow it, it kind of gives you the guide of where you're going, but it doesn't tell you what to do when things go wrong. And she, related that to a GPS, instead of that like paper atlas, right? A GPS, if you take a wrong turn, it's just like, rerouting, and it gets you back on how to get on track. And so I really liked that analogy with the new curriculum, especially because, in my district, we just adopted a new curriculum. So we're trying to navigate and figure that out. And it doesn't tell us what to do when things go wrong, when the student doesn't understand, or you have to reteach something. And that's like on us. Sometimes we have to go off that script a little bit to make it work. And so I really enjoyed her presentation. And then I went to Dr. Wijikumar's, which I think in part one, I was saying how I was looking forward to her session. I really find it fascinating listening to her talking about her work with the knowledge acquisition and transformation framework, which she describes like the studies she's done, and it's really amazing the results they are getting from teaching students about text structure and finding the main idea by using the text structure. So I really enjoyed her presentation, even though I've taken her free online course, which is free right now. It's literacy. I think it's literacy.io. I wrote it down somewhere if anyone wants to look that up. And I just want to say that something I really appreciate about her presentation is that she started by giving a shout out to some of the teachers who are using her framework in their schools. She had them stand up. She talked about the amazing results they are getting. And I just love, we talk about valuing teachers and how sometimes we need to, maybe do that more. Or, I really feel like she had a nod to teachers saying, hey, they are doing the hard work and they are here so that after the presentation, you can come and talk to them exactly about what they were doing in the classroom to get these amazing results. So I appreciated that.
Stacy or Lindsay, you and I talked about this a bit, having teachers be the focus of this. That's what we love about this conference so much, the Reading Leg, is this is really teacher focused. And we hope they don't lose that, right? That's so important, is to have this really great place for teachers to come, to be able to have that acknowledgement, and then also to have that relationship with individuals who are doing a lot of this work on the outside in research, and having teachers who are doing the work in schools and having them meet and have discussion. I think it's great. It's such a vibrant conference that way. And Stacy, how about you that same day, Tuesday?
Well, I actually went to Jamie Peevler's as well. I also am a fan, and I know her personally. She's equally delightful as an individual as she is as a presenter, very knowledgeable. And that room was crowded. There were people sitting on the floor. I was lucky because I found friends at the last minute who made somebody scoot. But she did a great job. One thing is that I listened to this, a very similar, if not the same presentation a few weeks before. She had done one for the Reading League. I can't remember which chapter, but I learned just as much the second time. That's how and she's such a good presenter. She keeps people engaged. She's very entertaining and funny, but also very knowledgeable. One thing that I made note of both times is a way to know that if a student has mastered a skill. And she talked about the fact that skill mastery occurs along a continuum of phases. And I really think that there's a lot here for teachers. So she talks about the first phase being acquisition, then fluency, then generalization, then adaptation. And she goes into detail about each of those phases. And they aren't hers, but she does give credit, of course, to the person who researched that. And I can't remember who that is right now. But she also talked a lot about cognitive load. She just did a really great job. And then talking about elevating teachers of all kinds, right? Not just in elementary or high school, but also in college. And so the second session I went to, or the third that day, was two professors from Canada who had revamped their literacy courses, and they were getting such great results. And I got some really good ideas. There were a lot of professors, of course, in that session, and we all had a really rich conversation afterwards for that. But they really did change their practice from balanced literacy. They were teaching 3Qing, Fountas and Pinnell, and totally aligned it. So a lot of respect for them and for the results that they got. And then that afternoon, probably one of my favorite sessions, because I really think that we need to highlight success stories when we're talking about implementation specifically of the reading, of science of reading. One thing that we know, you can have a teacher that is fantastic and doing a great job in the classroom, but if you don't have systemic supports, those students won't continue on that trajectory from one class to the next. So I went to Margaret Goldberg's session called Differentiation Done Right. And she is someone else that I really admire because I feel like she is so good at implementation, whether it's in a classroom or a school. She's serving as a literacy coach, and she was there with her principal, and they talked about a very specific format, walk to read, but they highlighted their progression, and it wasn't overnight. And they were really real and very forthcoming with how they made those changes. And I just think the more we can replicate things like that, the better off our students are going to be. And their data looked so good. And I was sitting next to a district administrator from Illinois. And we also had some really great conversations around that presentation. So Wednesday was a win. It was just such good stuff.
One thing we didn't mention is the days were packed. So when we're getting to that last session, these are going from 4:45 to 6. That's the last session. So imagine, you're really committed when you're making it through the full day, just so that folks know how much time you're putting in when you're there. One of the sessions I attended on that day was Carolyn Strom, and she does a lot with talking about what's happening in the brain when students are learning to read. And she has some really kind of student-friendly, even teacher-friendly language around what's going on in the brain. So rather than using the terminology, she comes up with more user-friendly terminology for things. The only challenge I had, and again, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's not the first time I've heard her speak. The room was packed, deservedly so. But one of the concerns I have is that teachers will spend time trying to teach their students some of this brain stuff that's going on as they read, which just isn't good instructional time. And that's the only concern that I had, is that making it friendly for a teacher to understand is not the same as this is so you can tell your students and you can have your students learning this while you should be teaching phonics or something else that's really usable. So that's the only concern that I had, is we might start seeing that show up, and it just isn't good value for the instructional time for students. Having them do the things they need to learn would be better. But again, a really good presentation. And then I also attended with you too, Stacy, Margaret Goldberg, in talking about that school-wide intervention and reading program. It was fantastic. And I agree with you, having her principal there. One of the things that stood out to me was not only was he there to help with the presentation, clearly he's supportive, he learned right alongside his teachers. That was the other piece that was very clear. He learned right alongside his teachers, showed up to those same classes he was asking his teachers to take, showed up to the same data meetings he's asking his teachers to show up to in order to discuss data. So anything he's asking his teachers to do, he's willing to do as well. And so not only was that walk to read, but he also walked the walk, the talk. He showed up and did all of the things. I think that was really important. She had terrific leadership too. And you're right, she's very clear. What I loved about Margaret Goldberg's presentation is she's so clear on the pieces. Oftentimes some of it's kind of hazy, but she was very clear on, okay, this is what we did first. This is what we did next. Oh, this was something I was hoping would work out. It just didn't. Here's why. I loved that too, that candidness about, gosh, I was really excited about this certain aspect, just didn't work. That was terrific. So a terrific day there, I think, for presentations. Moving on to Thursday, bright and early, we started off with, it wasn't a keynote to begin the day, rather we started with a session. That first one was 8:15. We got right off the ground and running. And so I'll lean back over to Lindsay and have you tell me what you attended that day, what stood out.
Okay. I really loved it. Might have been my favorite session of the whole conference. I don't know. It's hard to choose, but I really loved Sharon Vaughn. I was really excited to listen to her. And she did a great job. And she was talking about different ways to intensify intervention. And she was talking about the importance of aligning your tier 1 and tier 2 with your intervention. So your intervention in tier 2 aligns with what is being taught in tier 1. And it was really fascinating listening to her talk about her studies, the studies she did, where they just started with a comprehension intervention. And then they studied it where, it was aligned tier 1 and 2, doing the intervention in just tier 2 and not tier 1. And then like a business as usual was the third. And just clearly aligning that comprehension intervention in tier 2 while it was also being taught in tier 1 was, very significant results, like much better than the other things they were comparing it with. So I just thought, gosh, that's exciting and maybe something we need to look more into. And it can get complicated, right? Because you have different programs maybe in tier 2 or tier 3 than what's happening in tier 1. But it can be really powerful if we align those things, if there's like an evidence base, right? Of course, if we don't have a strong tier 1 that doesn't follow the science of reading, we're not going to get good results by double dosing that. But yeah, it was a really great presentation.
And how about you, Stacy?
Well, I don't know if we can go right to the keynote, but I thought that was really good. There we had Dr. Erie and then Barbara Foreman. And I thought that was a good pairing because Dr. Erie really set the stage with the research. And then Dr. Foreman talked about how to implement that research. And I thought each brought a lot of good information to the table. What did you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when Erie does I'm going to do air quotes here if you can't see me, but maybe you can, presentation, it's reading. And folks don't, Stacy, you told me that years ago before I'd actually heard her. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. She might look at her notes a couple of times. No, she's reading from her notes. So if people aren't expecting it, and you can see there's always people who don't expect it. And when she's in 10, 15 minutes in or 20, and folks are realizing, oh, she's going to read this, that's really interesting. It can be different because you're not used to that, right, as a presentation. Yeah. It's always really good though.
Yeah. So I had a friend said this to me and I'm like, oh, this is the perfect way. She says, this is like going to a Coldplay concert and they're playing Yellow. Like that's just what they're known for. You go to listen to Dr. Linnea Erie and she, what she is explaining is like the core of who she is, And I was just like, that is so great. That's a great way to look at it. So it was, really neat to be able to hear that straight from the source.
Literally, it's like she's reading a research paper. So you're listening to a research paper being read. But then we were discussing the fact that she is not a teacher. She's a researcher. And she teaches obviously at a university level, at some point, but her training isn't in teaching. It's just the purest form of research that you can get. So I thought that was Really interesting to note.
It was interesting, Barbara Foreman, when she put up as part of her presentation, had done a comparison of text by some of the large publishers of text. And what they were finding is that the text available for students that followed any sort of alignment with how they might learn in a phonics program was completely out of alignment. So kids were being presented with text. They might have a scope and sequence for how they were learning, say, patterns and things, but then the text itself wasn't following any kind of pattern whatsoever. So I thought that was interesting, and there needs to be more alignment. And Barbara really brought that up and made the case. I thought it was great. The other one, back to the Sharon Vaughn, because that's the one I attended with you, Lindsay, and it was really good, is she said some things about improving treatment effects. And she gave 4 things I think are really important. 1, you might need to change the dosage. 2, you might need to change the environment. 3, you might need attention and engagement needs to be looked at for the students. 4, modified delivery of instruction. I thought those were they sound so simple, but those are 4 things right away to look at if you're not getting the kind of results that you expect from, again, you've chosen a good program, you've researched, you made sure. But if you're not getting those results that you want, take a look at those 4 things first. Change your dosage, perhaps. Change your environment. Is there attention engagement? Modify delivery and instruction if need be. So I thought that was really great too. And having those tiers talk to each other, so important, made me think of my own son who, when we were in those early stages of trying to figure out how to help him become a reader, he had been introduced to no less than 4 different programs, each with different language about how they taught those basic skills. For the little guy who was struggling so hard, that made things even more difficult. That led to a lot of our struggles too. So I thought that was interesting. And Lindsay, you're not going to get away that easily. You were one of the presenters.
Yes, I was.
Tell us how it went. Your session was well attended. You were the last one of the day. No one loves drawing that card, but you did.
And if you I talked to so many people that day because I was about that, because I was so worried. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, out of all the time slots, I'm the very last time slot of the very last day, And I already was feeling, a little whoo, a lot of information is being thrown at you. It's easy to get a little overwhelmed. And I was just really thought, oh my gosh, will anyone be there at my session? And then I ran into Mitchell Brookins before I was going to speak, and I just love him. And he really just boosted my spirit, because he was just telling me, if whoever comes really wants to be there and they are there to hear something. And he's talking about, even if one person shows up, you give it your all for that one person. And I was just like, oh, thank you. He just really gave me so much confidence going in. But the room was packed. I was really honored that so many people came, even though we were all so tired. And it was the best crowd, I have to say. It was the best crowd. They were amazing. And then my favorite part was just at the end, because I just had, a line of people that were talking to me afterwards, and people crying with me, laughing with me, explaining how something I said changed something. One person had said, hey, I just emailed you a year ago and now this is what's happened. And I'm like, this is amazing. And it was so wonderful. I just felt it was just so special meeting all these wonderful educators that I was just so impressed with. So it was just such a neat way to end the conference, because this conference in general, you feel the love. It sounds so cheesy, but you go and you're united in purpose, and we can set aside, our differences and talk about what's best for kids. And so it was a wonderful way to end the conference. It was just really meaningful to me. I'll totally remember that, and meeting all those beautiful, beautiful people. It was amazing.
And, Lindsay, I'm impressed, because oftentimes I get to stand next to you as somebody says, oh, Lindsay, and comes up to talk to you. And I love that, because it really is teachers for teachers about teachers, which is great. And that's exactly what you want to see. It's such a terrific environment. Loved it. And so many great stories, as you say, people so genuine, so interested, so engaged, and also appreciative, not only of having the recognition, but also having some resources, which is terrific. And so I agree with you. It was fantastic. And I'm so glad your session was well attended.
Yeah.
Right before your session, there was one that I loved to see too at this conference, and I want to see more of it. And it was a panel of pediatricians who are interested in supporting the science of reading and doing what they can do to help see if they can be a part of screening, be a part of helping their families find resources. And I think that is a really important organization to involve in this with all of us. And so I was pleased to see them at this conference. And I'm hoping to see them at others. And I'm hoping to figure out a way in which all of us can get together in this space to get more people to get screening, to get intervention as soon as possible. So I thought that was great as well.
Yeah. And Lindsay, we wanted to come to your session, but we had a plane to catch and we had to leave the previous session early. And I was in Pam Kastner, Erin Amy, and Tambra Eisenberg's session, which was fantastic. They were talking about getting started with structured literacy in grades 3 through 5. And Pam Kastner apparently is retired, but she says she's failed at retirement. So I thought that was great. Because she's always so willing to share great things. And then on the same note, because I know Donell won't toot her own horn, but there were so many people when I was with Donell that came up to her close to tears or not, but just so grateful for her podcast episodes on dyslexia. So many of them mentioned the one with Curtis. If you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen. It is so powerful. But I think every 10 feet, somebody said something to her. So it's so great.
That is very sweet of you. I think my favorite comment was sitting in a session. A woman leans over to me and very gently she says, "So is Curtis here? Is your husband here? Did he come?" As if the two of us now travel together as a pair. I thought it was great.
Yeah, we all missed Curtis. We love him at conferences. There were sessions we would have liked to send him to. Dang it. Some of my most memorable conferences are with Curtis.
That's so true. He does do well at a conference. We've talked about that before.
Yes.
Again, if you can't hear through this podcast, we had a great time. We really did. We had a really good time at yet another Reading League conference. It's fantastic. We're also getting in our own state, we're going to be having a chapter here that will be official soon. It'll be great to have one in our state. Many states have them, and that's terrific too to be involved with is your local chapter. And then this national organization that puts on, hands down, a really good conference that was just fantastic. And they're always very accommodating, very helpful, and really thoughtful about who they have on their program. That's demonstrated by you see who the speakers are. They're trying to fill out different areas, reach into spaces that maybe you don't have a lot of background in and try to help you there by bringing folks to the conference. I think it was great. And so we're very appreciative. Once again, another great year at the Reading League Conference. And as you could hear in some of our comments, we thought there were fantastic people. We also want to acknowledge at the end of this podcast too, we did it in the first one as well, that we are aware of some folks who are in North Carolina and across the country in different areas that were impacted by the hurricanes. And they acknowledged that at the conference. And we want to acknowledge that again, that even though we had a lovely time in your state, it was fantastic to be there in Charlotte. We also realize that there are folks who are still struggling and need help. And we want to recognize that. But it was a fantastic time.
I was impressed how many people I met from North Carolina and from Asheville even that were there. Talk about dedication, I would say.
Yeah.
And next year it's going to be in Chicago, the Reading League Conference. So watch for that. I think you can register right now. It's open. It's October 2025 in Chicago, Illinois. So fingers
it'll be
crossed.
Another great one. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for the conversation for part 2. And thanks for everybody who's listening to this episode and to all of our friends who we got to spend time with at the Reading League Conference. We mentioned that in the first episode too, but I really loved it this time, that aspect of it, seeing people that we work so hard with, but you may not see on a regular basis. It was great. So thank you all for joining us for this episode. We hope you'll join us for the next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where reading momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacytalks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.